Hello, you're with BBC News. I'm Karen Giannoni in the BBC newsroom, and we're going to be taking you very shortly to inside number 11 Downing Street, the stateroom to be precise, because my colleague on BBC 5 Live, Matt Chorley, will be having a sit-down interview with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves. So there he is inside 11 Downing Street getting ready for that interview. Obviously, a lot of questions planned on the forthcoming budget, November the 26th. Also, that speech that Rachel Reeves gave unexpectedly early in the morning last week, laying the groundwork for potential tax rises, but not giving any detail of what is to come in a couple of weeks' time. But that other question, what is the government's response to the news? The news we heard breaking at 6 o'clock yesterday evening that the BBC Director General, Tim Davie, and CEO of News, Deborah Turness, have resigned after that leaked memo criticising a 2024 Panorama programme about Donald Trump. But let's talk about this some more with our political correspondent, Harry Farley. And Harry, I suppose we'll come to the budget in a minute, but we are expecting perhaps some government response on the BBC.
Yes, absolutely. And we heard from the Prime Minister's spokesperson actually this morning saying that the Prime Minister didn't think that the BBC was institutionally biased, but it did need to address its failings and mistakes more quickly than it has done in the past. And there's been reaction more broadly from across the political spectrum, I suppose. I was at a press conference this morning with the Reform UK's leader, Nigel Farage, who very clearly said that the BBC has been institutionally biased for decades. And he went on to say that he thought the Panorama edit that I suppose has been at the heart of so much of the conversation about BBC failings in the last week. He said that that edit was amounted to election interference because it came just before the last US presidential election. The Conservatives also have been very critical. So a real political divide in Westminster today in response to those two resignations right at the top of the BBC. And I suspect we'll hear more from the Chancellor about the government's view in the next few moments.
And as far as the budget's concerned, Harry, that very unusual move of that speech, I think it was 8:10 last Tuesday morning, Rachel Reeves speaking for some time, but we didn't get any detail of what was in or would be in the budget. We simply heard the potential reasoning behind what might be in it.
Yeah, exactly. The people in government talk about it as a scene setter. There is a desire in the Treasury for the Chancellor to be out and about, seen, doing interviews in the build-up to the budget, essentially to make the argument and to set the context for the measures that we will get in the budget. And I think that's what we can expect more of today. Not necessarily key measures, key changes that will come in the budget, but trying to make her argument for why those changes are necessary. We heard a bit of that, as you say, in that unusual press conference, that unusual address from Downing Street early last Tuesday morning, where she said the world has thrown more challenges our way, and she went on to list some of those challenges. She talked about the Brexit deal. She talked about the tariffs that Donald Trump has imposed and the impact that has had on global trade. She talked about the need to spend more on defence, and I suppose the key thing is that the decision by the budget watchdog, a body called the Office for Budget Responsibility, to reassess and to downgrade how productive the UK economy has been. And the reason that matters for Rachel Reeves now is that it affects how much money she has to play with, how much extra spending or extra tax rises that she might need to do because of a retrospective look at how productive the UK economy has been. That has been the most significant challenge, I suppose, that Rachel Reeves talks about. And she said the key phrase in that speech, each of us must do our bit. And that is being taken by many people to indicate, to signal, to hint at perhaps broad tax rises to come in the budget in just 2.5 weeks' time. I suspect we will hear more of that argument in the Chancellor's words, setting out the context for the decisions that she will make in that budget.
Harry, thank you very much. We are expecting to join that interview with Matt Chorley and Rachel Reeves just in a few seconds' time. Also discussing the other measures potentially that might be in the budget of the 26th of November. And on Thursday, the Labour Party's new deputy leader, Lucy Powell, saying Labour should stick to its manifesto pledge not to raise key taxes as it had promised before the election. But let's join Matt Chorley with Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, now.
His occupant, Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Thank you very much for hosting us.
It's lovely to have you here, Matt.
Now, I don't know. I've noticed behind me there's a piano. Do you play? Is that for your use?
No, but actually we had our team Christmas party up here last year, and we had a civil servant and a special advisor doing a little duet on the piano.
Do you sing?
No.
No, okay.
I play the flute.
Do you?
Yeah, it's downstairs in my office, but that's only because I'm lending it to someone.
Can we get that before the end of the interview?
No.
Get you on the flute. Do you practice with the Prime Minister?
No, he's better than me, I think. Yeah.
Right. So obviously, we've got a lot to discuss. We'll talk about the budget in a moment. First, I want to get your reactions to the resignation of Tim Dave and Deborah Turness. Do you have confidence in the BBC?
I have confidence in the BBC. It's respected the world over, and the BBC are rightly held to high standards, and they've fallen short on this occasion, and lessons do need to be learned. But I've got a huge amount of respect for the BBC, and I know they'll come back from this.
Donald Trump has sent a letter to the BBC threatening legal action. Would you support the BBC in dealing with that?
That's not for me. That's for the BBC and for President Trump. I'm not going to provide commentary or advice on that.
Well, wait and see. Well, some might say that running the BBC is almost as being hard as being Chancellor. So let's start with your job then. Just 10% of voters in the latest YouGov poll think you're doing a good job as Chancellor. Why do you think that is?
There's challenging economic circumstances at the moment. People voted for change in the general election last year, and I recognise that change is taking a while to come through. Cost of living is still too high. Despite 5 cuts in interest rates are still much higher than they were just 3.5 years ago. So I recognise that people still feel those cost of living pressures in their everyday lives, and they want those to be addressed. We've got a budget later this month. That budget will be focused on the cost of living, getting the debt down, and getting NHS waiting lists down, because I think those are the most important priorities for the country.
When I spoke to you in this very room almost exactly a year ago, you said that being Chancellor was your dream job. Has it turned into a bit of a nightmare since?
No, and I'll say it for a couple of reasons. First of all, you don't get to choose the circumstances in which you're Chancellor. I became Chancellor at a time when our national debt was incredibly high, almost the same size as our entire economy. Public services were on their knees after all the years of austerity, and the economy wasn't growing strongly enough. Those are the circumstances I inherited, but I actually believe that having a Chancellor who is determined to turn the country around and act in the interests of ordinary working people is even more important when it's a challenging moment rather than when it's easy to make the sums add up. And the second thing I would say is I've been an MP now for 15.5 years. A year and a bit of that has been in government, and the rest of it was in opposition. And I would trade one day being in government for all of those years in opposition when I was powerless to make change for our country. And since I've been Chancellor, we've invested in nuclear power stations, in new railway infrastructure, in new digital architecture for our country. We've introduced free school meals at primary schools for all kids whose parents are on universal credit, rolling out free breakfast clubs, £29 billion investment into the NHS, and record increase in the national living wage. So, have we done everything we want to do? Absolutely not. And I'm the first to recognise that. But we are making progress.
Has being in government, being Chancellor, has it been harder than you expected?
I think everyone can see that the last year or so, an awful lot of challenges have been thrown our country's way. And as Chancellor, I'm in the driving seat in responding to those challenges. But whether it is ongoing conflict around the world, which of course brings with it an economic cost, whether it is increased pressures on defence spending, and rightly so, or whether it is disruption to global trade because of higher tariffs, all of those have a bearing on our economy here at home. I'm just stating those as matters of fact, but they are things that, as Chancellor, I have to respond to, and all put pressure on borrowing, on spending, and on taxation as well.
Well, let's take that list of things. Like you said, you've included Brexit, COVID, the war in Ukraine, Donald Trump's tariffs. Is there anything that you've done, any policy decisions that you've made that have made the situation harder, that have hit growth?
Look, I recognise that every decision that I make has an impact. But I guess what I would say is you have to compare it to the counterfactual. So when I became Chancellor last year, we did face a big black hole in the public finances.
Well,
now,
instance,
I could have decided to ignore that and just say I'm going to borrow more, but that would have meant that interest rates wouldn't have come down, and that would have put pressures on family finances. So yes, I did increase taxes on the wealthiest and also on businesses. I recognise that those tax decisions have consequences.
That will have hit growth.
But what's the counterfactual? The counterfactual
Well, you could have
would
not
have been,
done it.
well, just borrow more, and if we'd have just borrowed
Or you could have not
more,
increased spending. Because actually the reason you put up taxes was because you've also massively increased spending. This isn't just about the black hole that you say inherited.
and that's because there hadn't been a spending review for years. Since then, inflation.
But you made a choice.
Wait a second, Matt.
You made a choice to put up taxes on business to spend more on public services.
Yeah, but a lot of that spending had already been committed to by the previous government. They just hadn't said where the money was going to come from. And I'm not going to apologise for bringing down NHS waiting lists. In the first year and a bit of this Labour government, we've reduced NHS waiting lists of more than 200,000.
Sometimes it can sound like you're taking the credit for all the good stuff, but anything
No,
bad
I
that's
recognise.
happened,
I recognise that
it is Donald Trump's fault. It's Brexit's fault. It's COVID's fault.
I recognise that those decisions to increase taxes in the budget last year would have impact on business and on the wealthiest, whose taxes we increased. What I would say is doing nothing wasn't an option, and I made my decisions of those taxes to rise, but as a result we've managed to bring down waiting lists and we've managed to bring down interest rates. So I stand by those decisions. Others can say they would have done something different, but doing nothing was not an option last year.
And last year you said, that's it, we've fixed the black hole, we won't be coming back to do it again. You're now talking about taking the necessary choices to balance the books. Let's just be plain now for our listeners and viewers. That means taxes are going up again, doesn't it?
Well, I'll deliver the budget in a couple of weeks' time, and for reasons that you understand, I can't go through the measures, but I have been really clear that we are looking at both taxes and spending as part of this budget. A couple of things have influenced the budget situation this year. The first is that the independent forecaster, the Office of Budget Responsibility, has done a review of how productive the economy is. Now, they'll be very clear. This is based on our productivity performance of the last few years under the last government, but they're using it to make projections about productivity in the future. And that does mean lower growth. And we have to accommodate that because we have to live within our means. And the second thing is those ongoing conflicts and disruptions to trade around the world that are weighing
Donald Trump's tariffs.
It's not just that, it's also the conflicts around the world as well, which are putting pressure on growth, not just in this country, but around the world. I mean, look, growth has not been as strong as I would like, but in the first half of this year, we had the fastest growing economy in the G7, but countries around the world have had pressure on growth because of these disruptions and because of these conflicts. And, you know, we're clearly not immune to those. And so as a result, I am going to have to look again at the tax and the spending numbers. But my priorities
because there's a lot of whether it's called pitch rolling or kite flying or briefing to papers, and it's left to journalists to interpret what you're saying. Taxes are going to go up in the budget, aren't they?
Well, we'll set out.
But when you say I'm looking at tax measures,
well, I've been really clear that the economic circumstances have deteriorated since a year ago because of those conflicts, because of those trade barriers, and as a result, we are having to look at taxes and spending, and it's got to be both of those things. And the speech I made last week was about setting the context for the budget, which is a difficult one. And I think people can see that and they understand why this is a difficult budget and why there are things that have happened in the last year that we couldn't have foreseen a year ago. But the principles that guide me in this budget are fairness and growing the economy. And the three priorities that I believe reflect the priorities of people in our country are to bring down NHS waiting lists, to bring down the cost of living, and also to bring down our national debt, which is making it harder to spend money on the things we want to spend on, because we're having to spend so much money on paying the interest on government debt.
On government debt. Let's come to the question of tax then. When the Labour manifesto said Labour will not increase taxes on working people, which is why we will not increase national insurance, the basic, high or additional rates of income tax, or VAT, why did you feel you had to make that promise in the run-up to the election?
Well, when we put together the manifesto, it had in it our spending commitments and then the tax changes that would be needed to pay for those. And we started with the envelope that we inherited. The truth is, what we inherited is significantly worse. Last year, I had to address the black hole in the public finances. And this year, we've had the new challenge of the Office of Budget Responsibility downgrading the growth forecast.
But your manifesto didn't say we will not increase taxes unless things turn out to be worse than we thought, or unless the world changes. I interviewed Keir Starmer a few days before the election and said to him explicitly, you're not going to do a George Osborne like in 2010 and come and say it's worse than we thought. We've opened up the books and it's worse than we thought, and actually we need to cut more. And he said, no, the manifesto stands. But what is the point of a manifesto if it doesn't last a day beyond you being elected into office?
Well, look, I will set out the choices in the budget. It would, of course, be possible to stick with the manifesto commitments, but that would require things like deep cuts in capital spending. And the reason why our productivity and our growth has been so poor these last few years, it's because governments have always taken the easy option to cut investment in rail and road projects, in energy projects, in digital infrastructure. And as a result, we've never managed to get our productivity back to where it was before the financial crisis. So look, we've always got choices to make. And what I promised during the election campaign was to bring stability back to our economy. And what I can promise now is I will almost do what I think is right for our country, not the politically easy choice, but the thing that I think is necessary, or the things that I think are necessary to put our country on the right path. Now, we're still going through the process at the moment of preparing the budget measures, so those final decisions haven't been taken yet. But as I take those measures, I will do what I believe is right for our country, and sometimes that means not always making the easy decisions, but the decisions that I think are in our national interest.
Well, I mean, you've made clear that that manifesto promise is going to be broken. What do you say then to your deputy leader of the Labour Party, Lucy Powell, came on my show on 5 Live last week and said we should be following through on our manifesto. Of course, there's no question about that. And she went on to talk about the importance of trust. That's one of your own colleagues.
Well, I think Lucy has been very clear since that interview that she stands alongside me and the decisions that I'll need to make in that budget, and the government, including Lucy.
But there is a question of trust, isn't there? That when politicians put something in their manifesto, and it wasn't just a small policy, this was a central plank of you establishing your credibility as a chancellor in waiting to not put up national insurance, income tax or VAT. There is a question of trust if that promise doesn't last barely a year.
I'll say a couple of things in response to that, Matt. First of all, this conversation will be a lot clearer after the budget. We haven't made final decisions yet about the measures in that budget. We'll set those out on the 26th of November, and then we'll have plenty of time to discuss the individual measures. But at the moment, it is a lot of sort of hypotheticals. But on this bigger issue that you speak of trust, I absolutely get that. But what people I believe, are sick and tired of by the last election is politicians putting their party and putting their narrow interests ahead of the national interest.
Aren't they sick and tired of politicians saying one thing and doing another as well?
Well, look, let me set out my budget on the 26th of November. But what I did last week in the speech that I gave in Downing Street was to set the context for that budget. And I think that all of your listeners, all of your viewers have seen over the last year, whether it's putting on the news in the evening or the radio in the morning or picking up a newspaper, they've seen the impacts of some of these global issues that are having an effect here at home, whether that's conflict or trade or tariffs. And however hard we work as a country and as a government, we're never going to be immune to those, especially as a small, open trading economy. We need to spend more on defence. That's becoming increasingly clear, especially since the NATO conference back in June or July. And the tariffs... I don't think anyone could have foreseen when this government was elected last year that we were going to see these big increases in global tariffs and barriers to trade. And I have to be Chancellor in the world as it is, not necessarily in the world as I would like it to be, but I have to respond to those challenges, and that's a responsible thing to do.
Let me ask you about one issue which I know is exercising Labour MPs. And the last time we were here, you talked about how Gordon Brown had been your hero. He's currently campaigning pretty hard to make sure that you scrap the two-child benefit cap in full. Are you gonna do what Gordon Brown wants?
Well, I saw Gordon yesterday at Remembrance Sunday, and we had a good chat, and we've emailed each other just today. So I speak to Gordon regularly. One of the things and one of the reasons why Gordon and Tony were such big heroes of mine was because of the measures that they took in government to lift children out of poverty. The reason, Matt, that I went into politics in the first place was because I believe very, very strongly when I was at school that all children from whatever background they came from should have an equal chance, an equal start
on the two-child benefit
in
cap.
life. So, look, child poverty should not be tolerated. No child in this country should grow up in poverty, and that's why we've already started to take action on free school meals, on breakfast clubs, on extending the Warm Homes discount to more families, including more families with children. And we'll take further measures in the budget, but no one should be in any doubt about my commitment, about Keir Starmer's commitment to ending the scourge of child poverty.
Well, clearly that'll be good news to those who want to see it scrapped. But what do you then say to our listeners? I mean, Resolution Foundation says scrapping the two-child benefit cap would cost £3.5 billion. It would lift 470,000 children out of poverty. But that does mean some people listening to this are going to be paying more tax in order for other people to have more benefits for their children. How do you explain to that if people are facing the prospect of higher taxes?
Well, I was listening to the radio. I was getting ready for work this morning, and there was a story around the number of people who are homeless in Britain today. Now, many of those will include families. They might not be living on the streets, but they might be living in temporary B&B accommodation, or they might be kipping on someone's floor in someone's living room. Now, obviously, they have real human costs, but it also has an economic cost as well, because the cost of temporary accommodation is skyrocketed and continues to increase. The costs of the lost educational attainment as kids move school constantly to move to new accommodation, the costs on people's health, both physical and mental, from poor quality accommodation, from a lack of good nutrition. The social costs and the personal costs are most important, but I don't think we can lose sight as well of the costs to our economy in allowing child poverty to go unchecked. And in the end, a child should not be penalised because their parents don't have very much money. Now, in many cases, you might have a mum and a dad who were both in work, but perhaps one of them has developed a chronic illness. Perhaps one of them has passed away. There are plenty of reasons why people make decisions to have 3-4 children, but then find themselves in difficult times. You'll also have things like adoption or foster caring. Lots and lots of different reasons why families change shape and size over time. And I don't think that it's right that a child is penalised because they are in a bigger family through no fault of their own. And so we will take action on child poverty. The last Labour government proudly reduced child poverty, and we will reduce child poverty as well.
Just finally, we asked listeners to get in touch with questions. We had an awful lot, as you would expect, about the two-child benefit cap and about income tax. Quite a lot, though, about the pressure that all of this has on you. We saw in the summer when you were upset in the Commons chamber and the market reaction that there was to that. How do you cope with doing this job? How do you switch off? Is it possible to switch off when all anyone wants to know is what you're going to do about this, what you're going to do about that, and the countdown to the budget?
Well, I've had a relaxing last 15 minutes with you, Matt. But look, I've got 2 kids, and I spend when I'm not working, and I am working pretty hard right now, but spend lots of time with them. Usual parent stuff. I went to fireworks on Saturday night back down in South London, and I go running. I went for running this morning.
In this weather?
Wasn't that bad?
I'm a very fair weather runner.
It was beautiful running through the London parks. So
and when you're doing that,
try and
do
switch off.
people recognise you? Do people shout out?
Run faster. No, I sort of keep my head down, and I don't listen to the Today programme or Five Live whilst I'm out running. I was listening to a bit of Ray this morning as I was on my run.
A bit of what rave music are you listening to?
Ray, not rave.
Oh, rave.
She's a popular singer.
Ray,
Matt.
Yes. Yeah, Where's My Husband and all that.
That's very good, Matt. Very good.
Rachel Reeves, Chancellor, thanks so much for joining us. So thank you for hosting us in number 11 here on 5 Live and on the News Channel. Chris Mason was listening to all of that. Hi, Chris. What do you make of it?
Labour manifesto, where she, in answer to your a couple of questions, you had a couple of goes at it, didn't you, Matt? I think by the second or third attempt, she said it would be possible to stick to the manifesto commitments, but that would mean deep cuts to capital spending, and that's long-term, what's described as investment spending. So there is clear desire that is the priority rather than the sanctity or otherwise of that promise. What is right is what is important, not what is the politically easy choice, she said. I was struck up until that point. There was a fair splash of Treasury language and politician language where I think we had the line, I've been really clear, I'm looking at taxes and spending in this budget, which I think has broadly been the purpose of budget since the dawn of time. But the thrust of it was an attempt at answering that question around whether taxes were going up without using the words tax and up in the same sentence. And then towards the tail end of your conversation, the conversation about the two-child benefit cap, and a particularly striking sentence, Matt. I don't think a child, said the Chancellor, should be penalised for being in a bigger family through no fault of their own, which seems to me that is going to be, it sounds like, a scrapping entirely of the cap. There's been some suggestion in recent weeks that it could be raised to a 3-child benefit cap or be tapered in some way, but it seems to me, at the very least, a literal interpretation of that sentence, I don't think a child should be penalised for being in a bigger family through no fault of their own, suggests that irrespective of the size of the family, an individual child's access to, if you like, their share of a family's benefit shouldn't be restricted by dint of the size of that family. And in the round, as you were probing, Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister, has been a passionate advocate of the removal of this cap, and she talked about seeing him yesterday and emailing him just today, with the implication, if not said explicitly, that she hadn't emailed him and told him to get lost because it wasn't going to happen. So yes. Anyway, I just kept talking then, Max. I think you're embarking upon your hurtle back. Is that right? Yeah, get your coat on. It's pouring down.